Going on up for my hacking biometrics. If you thought your fingerprints were safe, think again. What I hope to give you is just a really good idea about the good and bad of biometrics and the things you need to watch out for and how you can pick a better biometric solution out of the many that are out there. My name is Roger Grimes. I've been doing computer security over 34 years. I've written 13 books and over 1,200 magazine articles on computer security, including many on hacking multi-factor authentication and even hacking biometrics and that sort of stuff. And that's sort of what this talk is based also off of. But I even have more information and details in this talk. I got 81 slides, an hour to do them. I always talk real quickly. I'm going to be talking real quickly today. I work for KnowBe4. We're the world's largest integrated security awareness training and simulated phishing platform vendor. So we try to help stop people from being socially engineered and phished, and that's important because social engineering and phishing is the number one way that people are compromised, including people with biometrics. And we'll talk a lot about that today. The talk today is broken down to 3 different points. I'm going to cover just biometrics in general, then how you can hack biometrics, and then how you can select and use and choose safer biometric solutions. So, of course, I think everybody knows what biometric is, right? It's using some type of biometric attribute of your body to authenticate in a digital system. I think most people are familiar with fingerprints, fingerprint recognition, facial recognition, even retina and iris, so eye recognition, but palms. Sometimes some of us log in at palms. I do that at my local hospital. They like to do what's called palm geometry. Your veins of your eyes, veins of your finger, veins of your palm can be chosen. It could be voice recognition is becoming more popular. Touchless that tries to prevent disease transmissions becoming big since the days of COVID. And there's some other ones like typing, like the way that you type or the way that you move your mouse cursor can actually be used to identify you biometrically. And there's a lot of other, smaller projects like seeing if they can tell who you are by your smell or your brain print on EKG. And a lot of people think that your DNA would be the ultimate biometric attribute. Although I kind of beg to differ on that, and we'll talk about why that is later on. But also, biometrics can be used single-factor or multi-factor. With all things considered equal, I like multi-factor. But a lot of our biometrics is single-factor. It's like you may swipe your finger to get into your cell phone, or your Windows Hello laptop may look at your face and log you in, or your Apple iPhone Face ID may just look at your face. You don't have to type anything else. That would be single-factor. Why are biometrics popular? Well, you always have them, supposedly. Your body's always with you. Supposedly, the biometric trait being used is universally unique and nobody else has it, or even if it isn't, it's really darn close. And the measured attributes typically change slowly over time, so your fingerprints really don't change that much, at least at the level and the way that they're measured by fingerprint readers. Your face doesn't change that much except for over time where you gain weight and change your, hair and age and that sort of stuff. And typically they can be measured, your biometric attributes in seconds, just usually 1 to a couple of seconds. Anything longer, if it takes longer than 3 seconds to measure and confirm your biometric attribute, then people aren't interested in that type of system. Here's some examples of common biometric systems that I run into all the time, or most of them are. One of my new favorites is that credit card on the bottom right. It actually has a fingerprint scanner so that as you hand over your credit card, if you put your thumb kind of as you're grasping that credit card, theoretically it will read your thumbprint and then authenticate you and allow you to use your credit card in place of a pen or something like that. That's a new product that's being developed that I think is kind of interesting product. There's Windows Hello, where my laptop's asking to look at my face to log me in. There's a retina scanner. There's something supposed to be voice recognition, and there's keyboard dynamics and cursor dynamics. Those are new, or not even necessarily new. They've been around forever, but they're trying to make their way in the biometric world and get considered by more people. Biometrics is really exploding. In 2021, they just had a huge $4.38 billion funding explosion. So, it isn't just me and you interested in biometrics. It's the world, in the investment world. Excuse me for the coughing. So many biometric solutions are great and accurate. Many aren't. And we don't always know the difference. I'm going to try to help make you a better consumer. Most if not all, are not as accurate as the customers have been led to believe by vendors. vendors make some really outrageous claims, and I'll tell you how to tell the difference between it. But any vendor claiming that their biometric system is unhackable or completely unique in the world is not usually telling the truth. All of them can be hacked. We'll talk about how some of the ways they can be hacked today. But really, anything can be hacked, including biometrics. I can hack everything biometric and non-biometric. I mean, it's just the world, right? Anything can be hacked. But some biometric solutions are more accurate and far resilient against hacking than others, and that's what I hope to teach you today. Just know that biometrics are typically used in one of two major scenarios when they go to ID people. It could be one-to-one, like where you're just trying to authenticate to your phone or your laptop. So your phone or your laptop only has one person, one account, maybe one or two fingerprints associated with you, and they just need to verify that the face or fingerprint that you're submitting now is you. That's called verification. In a larger sense, biometrics can be used to identify a bunch of people. Like, I go to my office and I have to use my fingerprint to log on in to get into my office. It's trying to make sure I am who I say I am among a larger group of people. Or, there's lots of other systems out there that are trying to find one person, right? Like, maybe some crime database is trying to find one person, or they're trying to find a criminal's fingerprint to see if it's linked to a previously existing fingerprint. So a large bunch of biometrics are the identification type, where it's a one-to-many. And I just bring this up because when you're reading biometric surveys and reports and stuff, you may see this one-to-N or one-to-one and what they mean. And we, many of us use a bit of both. The basic process of biometric is that the biometric reader will capture your biometric trait, face, fingerprint, retina scan, whatever it might be. Then typically that system has to clean it up a little bit, remove artifacts from the biometric submission that they didn't want. Maybe you had a zit that day in your face, or your fingerprint had some dust or oil, or a small micro abrasion or something like that. The biometric solution will select the data points of what they're going to store, and then they store it. And then when you go to authenticate, there will be this algorithmic comparison of your submission versus the stored image, and then there has to be some algorithmic decision: do they match or not? So whether you get authenticated or not. That's the typical capture, storage, use, selection of biometrics. But a lot of people I talk to think, oh, biometrics are the holy grail. Oh my God, they're the best thing since sliced bread. Biometrics can be good, but there are certainly some issues, and I'm going to talk about a lot of these issues today: accuracy, security, hacking, what to do if your biometric attribute was stolen. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on how a shared biometric system could promote disease transmission, but that certainly is a bigger concern since COVID. So you'll see a lot of biometric systems becoming touchless when they're shared. So, you don't have to put your fingerprint right on the scanner. You don't have to put your conjunctivitis infected eyeball right on the eyeball scanner and stuff like that. Certainly people are having a big problem with privacy issues and government intrusion, where you have large, countries. Most of today's countries have literally databases of billions of people's faces, and people wonder if that's such a good thing. And we'll talk about bias today as well. But let's start off with the accuracy, and that is really the biggest problem, is that most biometric systems are not nearly as accurate as they're touted by the vendor, and not as nearly as accurate as most people believe. If you're going to get into biometrics, you're going to need to learn the terms false reject rate, type 1 errors, or false accept rate, type 2 errors, false negatives, false positives. False negatives is I've submitted, and I'm the correct person. I've submitted a biometric comparison, and the system has the biometric attribute, but it doesn't see it. So it's a false negative, a false reject. I am who I say I am, but the system didn't think it was. Or it could be a false accept rate. That many times for security purposes could be worse, where it is accepting somebody to be somebody else. So that person wasn't that person, but the system thought it was. That is what we traditionally get worried about. But really, every authentication system, every multi-factor authentication system, every biometric system has this certain percentage of false negatives and false positives, and they have this crossover error rate where the errors kind of equal each other. And then most systems will be tuned to accept either more false negatives or more false positives. And we'll talk more about that. But just know that there is this, thing where you have these errors, and a system, for one reason or another, is going to want to say, well, I will tolerate more false negatives and less false positives, or vice versa. And you have to make sure you kind of agree with that evaluation. What everybody wants is, a low number of false negatives and a low number of false positives, but it is, I've never heard of it being that way. It almost always, they're inverse of each other. And, the Holy Grail would be something that has a very low number of errors and can do both. But I haven't read about a system that did that, although their system's trying to get better in that. But, most of the time when when you lower false negatives, you're raising false positives and vice versa. And the vendor has to make this trade-off. In general, most vendors want low false negatives for verification. So if I'm trying to use my fingerprint to go into my cell phone, they want it just to work and let me into my cell phone and not keep me locked out of my cell phone or my face, logging me into my laptop or whatever it might be. And they want low false positives for identification. So if they're looking for a criminal with a particular fingerprint, they don't want that fingerprint to indict the wrong person. Matter of fact, in some of the, the FBI system, when they think they have a fingerprint match, it requires that one or two humans actually review the match to see is it really the match. But, again, you have this trade-off of one or the other, and most systems are going to choose to have more of one error and less of another for one reason. Biometric accuracy is, can be, at least the claims of accuracy that the vendors give it can be suspect. But, there are just simply people that don't have the biometric attribute. So, in large systems, when you have 100,000 people, you're trying to biometrically identify using something like a finger. There are people born without fingers or eyes, or they may be mute and can't do voice recognition. Twins many times, are able to get past biometric systems. Actually, twins can get by facial recognition systems, but they have different fingerprints. Eye diseases could cause constant change, so a retina scan or an iris scan may not work. There are people that are born without fingerprints, and really, what can make hard for biometrics is just, your fingerprints get microabrasions over time. You may get a cut or a scar. Your facial tattoo, your neck tattoo may make it off. Your weight gain could change your face or your fingerprints, weight gain or weight loss. People that play guitar might wipe off their fingerprints. I know a guy that once worked in a sandpaper factory. That's what he did for a living, is he made sandpaper, and he had no fingerprints. He would actually, to clean his hands, he would dip his hands in acid when he went on vacation and stuff. His hands were always permanently dark, but if he wanted to go on vacation so he wouldn't freak people out, he'd put his hands in this acid, but it made his fingerprints go away. I've seen people that paint a lot or do crafts or get a lot of glue or garden a lot where their fingerprints just aren't consistent time to time. But even more importantly, if you're wearing glasses like I am today, that makes false positives and negatives more often. Masks during COVID time certainly impacted it negatively, but just in general, lighting, lower lighting makes issues in different angles. If I put my face down versus my face up or something like that, that could undermine or change the accuracy. So accuracy in biometric solutions, just inherent in what it is, could have some, issues. But vendors are really, a lot of vendors, not every vendor, but, I hear a lot of vendors like, our biometric attribute is unique in the world, and that may be, your eyeball veins, your retina scan, your face, whatever it might be unique in the world. But that doesn't mean that it's unique in the way that that system utilizes it. Or they may tell you, the hardware involved can, one out of, two, only has 1 out of a trillion errors, or, they'll just say the solution. It can tell the difference between you and 100 million other faces. Be careful, because if they're touting, most of the time they're touting the maximum, ability to differentiate between something, or the trait that's involved is unique in the world. How the trait is used in their system is not nearly as comprehensive as being unique in the world. Like, for fingerprint scanners, they'll say, oh, your fingerprint's unique in the world, but the best accuracy that most systems will be able to promise you is maybe 1 in 100,000. What is there? I forget how many billions of people in this world, but the most advanced fingerprint system is only going to guarantee you to tell the difference between 1 out of every 100,000, or in general, 1 out of every 100,000 people, because there's a difference between what's the possible differentiation and how it is in the system as implemented. So again, like, a vendor would say, oh, your fingerprints are unique in the world. We don't even know that for sure, but so far it does look like that. We haven't taken the fingerprints for everybody in the world, and there have been some previous matches between people, but maybe that was due to the system not being that great. But let's say that it is true that, and let me say we haven't compared our fingerprints against, the other 10 billion human beings that used to exist on this planet. But let's say that, it seems like there's a good chance that your raw fingerprint is unique in the world for you. Well, the way that a biometric reader reads your fingerprint, most of them, is that they look at all the swirls and twirls and, moves and where it goes up and canals and stuff like that. And it actually makes points. And this is kind of a really rough, gross point representation, but they'll actually kind of map out your fingerprint. Most fingerprinting systems don't make the decision based upon the actual picture of your fingerprint. Even if they store your fingerprint, the way the algorithmic decision is made is that they're picking points of changes on your fingerprint that have a representation of your fingerprint, but is not your fingerprint. It's more like a star constellation. And they take these points, and that's really kind of what gets stored in the database. And really what they do is they separate the points. You'll hear something like a 4-point identifier, a 5-point identifier. If you watch CSI, you'll hear them talking about it was a 4-point match. Whatever it might be, is your fingerprint is broken down into these different points. And then every time you submit your fingerprint or anybody else submits their fingerprint, their fingerprints, again, kind of turn into these points and compared to the stored points. And they even have to kind of take, they realize that when you submit your fingerprint or your fingerprint is taken or your face or whatever it might be, that, those points could be a little bit off. You're never going to put your fingerprint on the fingerprint scanner the exact same way you did last time. Always be a little bit off. So they actually are comparing these points with kind of a rotation, right and left and that sort of stuff. So what happens is that the points that made up your fingerprint essentially becomes this smaller set of points that will actually match lots of other people. So even though your fingerprint may be unique in the world, the points that are pulled off of your fingerprint and rotated and turned so that they can help match you more quickly in under 3 seconds is far less unique in the world. There are lots of people whose fingerprints that look nothing like your fingerprints that may match the points that are stored and used in most systems. And a lot of people don't realize this, but most, as an example, fingerprint readers, but really this applies to any biometric reader because of that. Most fingerprint readers and biometric readers, especially in popular consumer devices like your iPads, your iPhones, your Android phones, that sort of stuff. But even in the corporate environment, these readers are detuned because they actually don't, they wouldn't want you, if you've ever been to your cell phone, you've tried to use your fingerprint scanner and you had dirt or glue or something, and you couldn't log into your fingerprint scanner or get in your phone, it frustrates you. I got to pull out here and do the pen now. Or if you go to work, if you had to forever put in your fingerprint in a fingerprint scanner, you never got let in, even though it was really your same fingerprint, that would frustrate you. So most vendors actually detune them to accept they want to have far less false negatives. And in doing that, increases the chances of false positives. Most popular consumer devices are intentionally detuned to have less false negatives so that you will not be mad, because you would be mad if you had to stand there for 15 seconds while it recognized your face, your finger, or whatever it might be. So in the real world, you always hear, oh, your fingerprint's unique in the world or something like that. Fingerprint readers on your cell phone and in the real world are not unique. They don't store your fingerprint or use it in a way that's unique in the world. I once belonged to this 500-person organization. I was like employee 435 or something, and they had a fingerprint scanner to get into the door. And when they told me to put my index finger on the fingerprint reader to be enrolled so I could get in the office, I had it matched some other employee. And they're like, oh, that's happened before. So with less than, it was 435 people, I was already the second match, and I had to use my other finger. So that was like, there was a match in the way that this system did fingerprints just out of 435 people. And I was I was already the second employee that had a match. And let me say, this is not unusual. If you go to any company that's ever done large scale biometrics, this is it's a fairly common situation that you'll have these matches among smaller populations. And when you go to really large populations, like, 100,000 people or something like that, there are always going to be all kinds of matches that you'll see there. Or in another case, again, supposedly the cell phone fingerprint scanner is like 1 in 50,000. You only get an error, or maybe 1 in 100,000. Windows Hello, I think, is 1 in 100,000. The NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they really are looking for an accuracy standard of 1 out of 100,000 submissions that you'll get an error. That's the kind of the goal where you want your biometrics to be. Well, for whatever reason, my cell phone was unlocked by a customer's fingerprints once. I was talking about how I think that cell phone fingerprints are, can unlock a cell phone. Other people's fingerprints can be unlock somebody's cell phone. And there was like 25 people in the class, and I handed in my cell phone, and the first person I handed it to unlocked my phone. So, that's interesting there. And let me say, it's not just me, it's lots of other people. If you, Google on the internet or Bing on the internet and you look up, you'll see lots of people recounting how someone completely unrelated to them fingerprint unlocked their phone. And again, that's just because they're just not as accurate as they've been touted. As a matter of fact, NIST does some of the best biometric evaluations of accuracy. They've done fingerprint and faces and some other ones, but they have this, has been going on for over a decade, called the Fingerprint Vendor Technology Evaluation, where you as a vendor can submit your real-world fingerprint algorithm solution and then let NIST evaluate it. They had literally, I think it was over 450 solutions, and this is a little bit aged, but it's still the best current study. There's another study ongoing right now. And let me say, in general, fingerprint technology gets better year over year. But this is the largest public study that we know of a bunch of different 450 different fingerprint algorithm solutions. And the most accurate miss rate was 1.9%. Remember, the goal that NIST wants to have is 1 in 100,000. So that would be like 0.0001 percent. But what we're seeing here is a miss rate. The best was close to 2%. That means, on average, 2 fingerprints will be wrong out of 100 that are submitted. And this is a false negative type issue, but most solutions were in the range of 5 to 15%. So that is just a general large-scale study where they actually it was a single index finger searching 30,000 subjects being searched among 100,000 subjects. And, the best, most accurate was about 2%. Had a 2% miss rate, which is, pretty good, but that gives you a sense that even the best, fingerprint algorithms just aren't nearly, they're not unique in the world. If fingerprint scanners are unique in the world, that's what, NIST would say the standard is. There's no misses, but, NIST is saying the miss can be 1 out of 100,000, I think is the goal in most of those. Or, Windows Hello. I've had, ever since I wrote the book, Hacking Authentication, I've had people email me. It used to be once a week, then it got to be once a month, and now it's getting longer. It's probably been 5, 6, 8 months now since I've had one. But I used to get people coming up to me or emailing me telling me that their Windows Hello facial recognition would log in their kid as them. They'd install Windows Hello, they'd be excited, and then their toddler would walk by and it would log them in. The toddler would be able to walk up to the laptop and be logged in. And again, I heard these stories over and over. And you can go on the internet and see that, where someone's talking about, there's this guy that's a male, 53-year-old male wearing glasses, and his 8-year-old daughter, gets logged into his Windows Hello. This is reports about 6 years old or something like that. And I'm assuming they've gotten better because everything gets better over time, but it just happens, and there was somebody else that was responding to that going, hey, this happens to me. I have a friend. One of my friends was able to unlock my Surface Book with his face no matter how many times I reset it or retrained it. And again, you can go on YouTube and see lots of people unlocking and doing different things, the Windows Hello and facial recognition and Face ID and that sort of stuff. So not uncommon. So again, probably the gold standard of this is the NIST face recognition vendor test. Since 2017, they had over 450 algorithmic applications, and that's really something that when you're buying a biometric solution, there's an algorithm that works behind the scenes, and that's really what you're interested in, even more than, if the brand name says that it's Microsoft or Apple or whatever. What you're really interested in is the algorithm that works behind the scenes. And what they say here is, many times they look at what's called the false non-match rate. So this would be the same as a false negative. That's the rate at which a biometric solution says the same person is not the same person. So false negative, saying it is the same person, but the solution is saying it's not the same person. That's what this study looks at. And what they want, again, NIST wants an error goal of 1 in 100,000 errors, which on this chart, this lists some of the vendors. There's 450 vendors, so I can't list them all. But what they want is a match rate or an error rate of 0.00001. If you look at the chart here, nobody even comes close to that. And the ones that are kind of in the red squares are really horrible. Like you have some that are not super, super bad, like 0.0034, that's, 3/4 of 1%. Not bad, but you've got others that are like 17%. There's one there that's 84%, 94%. God forbid that you're using the algorithm ASICW-007. And then you see others that are a lot more accurate. And you can see that some of them are accurate under particular types of tests that they were doing, mug shots versus border pictures or whatever. And that's something just to keep in mind here is that, you want to make sure that when you're looking at a biometric solution, that if you can, go look up its algorithm to see how well it's faring in this test, if you can find out what that algorithm is, because there are some of them that do really, really well. There's a lot of the middle of the pack. And then there's a couple that are just really hideous. And if you don't research the algorithm behind the biometrics that you're thinking about buying, you may not know. As they said here in kind of their solution here, the false negative error rates in a particular scenario range from a few tenths of 1% to beyond 50%. If you're going to buy a biometric solution, you want to have an error rate that is, hopefully, below 1%. And it'd be nice if you got one of the few tenths of a percent. That's really what you're looking for, and you don't know unless you go look. And then sometimes here's an interesting thing. They actually looked at twins. And I was at Microsoft when they did Windows Hello against like 100 sets of twins or 200 sets of twins, and Windows Hello recognized all twins. And even when people couldn't. I think the average person, the best they could get was like 98%. They missed a couple sets of twins. There's a couple of sets of twins where they couldn't tell who was who or something like that. But anyways, the NIST report says they didn't have any algorithm submitted that could distinguish between identical twins. So, that means you could have a match. That's one of those crime stories where the twin did the murder. But, I don't know how to reconcile that. I saw at Microsoft where Windows Hello was able to recognize the difference between twins better than humans. But according to NIST, with at least what was submitted to them, they did not see the case. So most of them do have problems with twins. Voice recognition is a really common thing these days, either to do verification or identity. Like when I call my stock company, they say, "Oh, your voice has been verified," just from me, saying my login name in a pen or something over the phone. Attackers will try to attack this by capturing, if they're going to do a trial to see if they can do a deep fake of someone's voice. They'll capture the victim's voice, hopefully multiple times, doing multiple phrases and stuff. And then they'll use deep fake, these days, AI technology, artificial intelligence technology. There's a bunch of free deep fake technology to be able to create new phrases that might be used in the attack. Let me say, I've been involved in some of these tests, and in my test where we were trying to fake someone's voice into faking the voice recognition system, in my amateur test and being involved with my friends, we were not able to fake out the voice ID system, but apparently people can. You look on the internet here, and here's this guy that's in charge of a red team, and he was trying to see the help desk of this company had a voice recognition system where you'd say, "Please authenticate me with my voice." And this guy recorded a particular person's voice and replayed it into the help desk. And you see what he said here. The attack ended up being successful. Audio samples that don't sound realistic to human ears were accepted by the application as legitimate. The surprising part is how permissive the system actually was. So that doesn't give you great, faith, at least in that help desk system. But again, that help desk system is probably detuned to have, more, in this case, more false positives than false negatives. Or would it be they'll accept more false negatives. They want less false negatives, so they end up accepting more false positives. That's probably, I was getting mixed up there for a minute. And here was another YouTube, and again, you can watch these all over YouTube, where this guy fools a bank recognition voice system. So it's not just help desk systems, it's banking systems. And this guy says that most bank voice recognition systems can be easily fooled. So it doesn't give you great confidence in voice recognition systems. What I can say is I've been involved in voice recognition systems that were not easily fooled by me and my friends, and we were really trying hard. So again, it really comes down to the type of system that you're choosing, and you make sure you want to choose one that is accurate. NIST hasn't done a voice recognition thing yet, but there has been for many, many years something called the Voice Conversion Challenge this year. They've got one in 2021 and 2022. They do it every year. It's been happening since like 2015, but the results aren't out for the 2021 one. But here is a list of the, what was a total of 33 competitors, and what they're trying to see is could the voice recognition system detect a deep fake spoof? So a higher number is better. And if you look over the systems, a lot of them did really good. I mean, 70 and 80%, some of them did 100%. So some of the systems, like the TO8 competitor, it detected 100% of the deep fakes as deep fakes. And so did TO6 and T12. But you can see they didn't always do good. A lot of them didn't do really good. And one system had a 0.01. TO3 doesn't look like a system I want to go with. So just be aware that there are stronger and weaker, voice detection systems out there. And something to keep in mind, a new thing you'll hear coming out from NIST and coming out from other biometric sources, something called bias. That biometric solutions can have a technical higher false positive and higher false negative rates with particular populations. So let me tell you, when I first heard about bias, I'm like, what's happening? Is politics leaking into biometrics, leaking into authentication? It has nothing to do with a person's personal bias. And they're not saying the systems have this personal bias, although I think we've heard some algorithms tend to somehow have the biases of the person that created them. But this is talking about just a technological bias where the technology being used is just not able to be as accurate on some populations. Like in general, most biometrics that look at that involve the face tend to do worse at people with darker skin color, and it could be for a myriad of reasons, but it just is that the technology is there's more false positives and false negatives because somebody has, a darker skin color. And so again, the NIST study actually did a really good, they had 450 candidates and they looked and they did see that some algorithms, they said the most accurate algorithms overall had the least amount of errors, which is good. But, some algorithms had error rates to above 10% based upon particular demographic, typically a dark person or women. I think I heard that some of the systems had a harder time recognizing women versus men. And I think that is something that you just need to be aware of, is that certain solutions could just technically I think that the dark skin thing is that the light reflects too much or not enough or something like that. And so it causes problems with the algorithm. It isn't a personal bias per se, although it could be a training bias as well. But it has more to do with just the way that light reflects off of different colors, and that causes a technical bias. And then, keep in mind that you could have things like an economic bias, like 25% of the world doesn't have a cell phone. So if you pick a biometric solution that works with cell phones, you've already, 25% of the world, it may not be your population, but 25% of the world may not, have a cell phone, or they may have a phone they share with somebody else. I remember hearing the speaker saying, they're globally trying to do something biometrically, and they found out that 25% of the world doesn't have a cell phone. And many people share cell phones with their family and friends, and they may not even trust the person they share the cell phone with. So how do you biometrically authenticate somebody over a phone when it's not even their own personal phone? And even here in America, I remember talking to a guy that he was the IT security manager for a bunch of roughnecks out in Texas, so oil drill workers, and they implemented a push-based MFA solution that worked on a cell phone, and found out that lots of the workers that worked on the drills, oil rigs and drills, only had flip phones, and they didn't even have smartphones. So they had to buy them smartphones and then train them in the smartphone technology. So it just means that, sometimes your solutions, you have to keep in mind that not everybody has the same capability or ability to do what you might do or what most of your population might do, and that's something just to consider. So Overall, just on accuracy, just be aware that some biometric solutions are more accurate than others, and you need to know which you are buying or using. Now let's get to hacking biometrics. Many different ways to hack biometrics. You can hack the biometric reader or process itself, which we'll talk about briefly. You can really hack any other components involved in it. The biometric reader is just one of the parts. You can do man-in-the-middle attacks. We'll talk about that. You can fake the biometric attribute, which we call presentation attacks, and you can steal the attributes and reuse them. But just know in general, when you're trying to hack any authentication system, including biometrics, that they all have their solution dependencies, right? That you have the reader itself, you have hardware, you have software, you could have firmware, you have an identity provider that it's being used with, you have storage spaces, there's cryptography. Really, most systems have all these different components, and each of them could be a potential avenue for a hacker to take advantage of. And, when you're using multi-factor authentication or biometrics, the person is having to use them. They're submitting the attribute to what's called a relying party that needs to verify that the submitted attribute is the correct one. And, there's just all kinds of actions going on. And each of those actions can be subject, each of those actions and components can be subject to a hacker attack methodology. And I won't talk a whole lot about this, but, a lot of people don't realize this, but you can attack the biometric reader device itself. So if you have, let's say, a fingerprint reader on your laptop or a facial recognition thing on your laptop, if I, as an attacker, can get on that device, I can interfere with that process, right? I can change it. I can modify an attribute on the fly. I can steal the data. I can steal your biometric attributes out of the database and reuse them somewhere else or replay them. I can modify, the process that, makes a decision. Is this person, authenticated or not? There are all sorts of things within the biometric device and reader system itself that can become areas where a hacker can attack it along with all the other components. So lots of surface area where a hacker could attack a biometric system. And here are all the different ways that could be used against a biometric solution. If I was doing a penetration testing audit, this is what I would look at, trying to do all these different solutions to see if I could compromise a particular biometric solution. I would take each of these hacker methodologies and try it against each of the components and each of the transitions to see if I could be successful. And this is to say that, many times what you think might be strong might be broken every day by different hackers or people or companies. Like there are hundreds to dozens of companies with products that bypass your cell phone screen lock. So I don't care if you're using a pen or a Face ID or a fingerprint to log into your phone. There are literally 100 companies out there that sell products that will break into your cell phone. And they're just commercial. They always say, we're for law enforcement, or nation states or whatever. But they oftentimes give them to people that claim to be law enforcement or have a legitimate need. It's the solutions are only as secure as their entire protections. And there are many people that know how to hack and bypass your biometric protection, even if the vendor says, it's super protective. There's even, a lot of times software will have bugs. And here's an example of somebody where they're actually putting, I think it's an iPhone. Yeah, it is an iPhone. They're connecting to it on a USB cable, putting it into what's called debug mode, and then running this code injection. You can watch this on YouTube if you want, but essentially they're registering some new jobs that had to do with, is the biometrics disabled? So they actually are injecting a job that are disabling the biometric protections through the debug mode, and anybody can do that, copies this person's injection script and does exactly what he does, can do the same thing to an iPhone. It requires physical access to it, but they're essentially turning off the biometric detection. Some people, there's got to be 200 videos on YouTube showing people bypassing biometric or lock screens by, you basically pull up the emergency call. Every cell phone has the ability to make an emergency call, and they're thinking 911 or something. And people have found out that they can reset the phones through that. They can call the cell phone vendors, reset code that reformats the phone and lets them into the phone. Or a lot of people, if you look at this video, I'm not going to show it today, but this video will show you that they're literally typing in. They just go over and over doing a bunch of different codes, and eventually the phone just gets overworked and just lets them into the phone, as a brand new person. So I don't have time to show you that video, but they're all over the internet, including the one I'm showing you there. And it just happens, different codes for different phones and different times and that sort of stuff. What we certainly worry about is these presentation attacks, where someone fraudulently creates a false biometric, like they have a fake finger or fake face or something like that. Just know there is an ISO standard for this about how biometric systems should prevent presentation attacks. They call it presentation attack detection, PAD attack. A PAD, not a PAD attack, but a PAD defense, presentation attack detection. So all biometric solutions should try to detect whether or not someone's making a false biometric. I, over the last 20 years, have been hired to break into many, many biometric solutions, fingerprint scanners mostly, but I've done facial scanning and handprint geometry. And in every case where I was hired, my team was hired to break into the biometric. We broke into the biometric, by making fake fingerprints. We've done silly putty and Play-Doh, and my favorite was on a fingerprint scanner, we could literally just blow hot air, cup our hands and blow hot air and activate the fingerprint oils on the last person's fingerprint and cover it up with a piece of dark material. And it would literally, fingerprint scanner would see the old fingerprint oil activated and log us in as the last person that logged into that machine. So it isn't always that difficult to do. And every time, you always have vendors that go, oh, we check to make sure it's a real person, called liveness detection. We'll talk more about that. But no matter what they do, there's always some hack or some kid on YouTube showing how easy it is to get around that particular solution. Just in general, like this was a couple of years ago, but this person tested 110 smartphones and said, 40% of them didn't work as advertised. And they were using pictures and 3D mask and Photoshop blinking eyelids on animated GIFs and that sort of stuff. So, in this case, I remember it was notable because LG, Nokia, and Lenovo, failed the cell phone test, and Sony, which were the majority of the phones back in that day. And the Apple iPhone didn't fail this test, but it failed another test. But, essentially, if you go to YouTube and you just search on biometric hacks or multi-factor authentication hacks or whatever, you're just going to see lots and lots of people, most of the time, being successful in hacking a particular solution. Not always, but you'd be amazed about how often they do it. The vast majority of them are people like me and you, just trying, making a fake mask or a fake picture and giving it a shot and seeing if it worked. And, many, many times it does, work. There is this new thing, well, it's not new, it's been around for a decade, called liveness detection, where if you have a solution that has liveness detection enabled, it's supposed to try to make sure that the biometric attribute being presented is live. So what they'll do is look for changing light off of a face or a fingerprint. They'll try to see if the finger seems to have blood flow through it. Is the person blinking their eyes and blah, blah. It's called liveness detection. It's a big deal. But there actually is a contest. It has been a contest for, I think, nearly a decade called Live Detection Competition Series, where people submit solutions that try to fool the liveness detection. And, a lot of these people, most of these people are college PhDs, but, year after year they're submitting. And I don't think there's ever a biometric solution that they have not faked. As a matter of fact, according to the last contest, 2021, the winning solution of the image category, the image and video categories, convinced facial scanners to accept fake images 16% of the time. So that's they're, as much as the biometric vendors try to do this liveness detection, many times it is able, the competitors and hackers are many times able to fool them. Although this is an interesting YouTube, if you go there and look, this amateur created a fake mask of herself, 3D mask, and then put it on her friend, and it didn't work. But, I always say that this is an amateur, and I don't see her friend with the eyes. I think if she would have put that mask more on her so her eyes were there, maybe it would have passed. I like it that Apple Face ID and iTouch and stuff, you'll see it's a better solution. Microsoft Windows Hello is a better solution. And you'll see contests in which they fail. But I always have the sense that these are really amateur people And if you were to put it to the PhDs of the world in the nation states, they probably would fail at some point. They'd be able to get around the liveness detection and fool the trick. I mean, amateurs are on YouTube all the time, but just because you see somebody say, well, it didn't work, it depends on the implementation. And my sense is that if a nation state is after you, they've got really good people and could get by. But I think it's good to see when a solution works, right? In this case, Apple Face ID didn't fail the test. Well, so that means that somewhat of a test failed, sophisticated or not. It's more than I'm not doing 3D mask. Nice to have a solution that fails those tests. But really, what you want to look for is again, look at NIST or one of these other labs, seeing are you using one of the more accurate solutions. Again, for liveness detection, you're looking for that ISO 30103-3. NIST is coming up with a presentation attack detection standard test coming soon, so that should be out of the next year or so. So we'll look at NIST again, and they're even going to accredit independent labs. Like there's a lab out there called iBeta that can evaluate different facial recognition solutions to see how good they are. So we don't have a lot of really great liveness detection stuff yet beyond that live detection competition, but pretty soon NIST is coming into that, and we'll have independent lab tests pretty soon. So I think that's great. I think the future of biometrics may be where we have this continuing detection, where instead of just measuring your face or your fingerprint or whatever, just once, maybe it's done the whole way, like it's looking at your face the whole way, so harder for a 3D mask to work or something. Although also, I've had some acquaintances and friends that have keystroke dynamic and cursor dynamics, so they can actually supposedly tell the difference with a high degree of accuracy based on how you type. So you could type your password, somebody else could type your same password, and they would type it differently than you. And the same thing with the cursor. Apparently, we all move our cursor around the screen differently, and they claim they can biometrically identify you by keystroke or cursor. That's kind of a neat idea, where maybe you log in with a face print or a fingerprint ID or password, but then your keystroke and your cursor is being measured, and if it seems to be weird, that maybe you start to get this higher risk score, and maybe you have to get authenticated again or something. That's kind of the continuous detection, continuous authentication. You'll hear stuff like that in the Zero Trust Initiative. So this sort of stuff really interests me, and I think could be a big part of future solutions. Copied biometrics. This is something to keep in mind, is that there is nothing inherent in a biometric solution that stops man-in-the-middle attacks. If an attacker can insert themselves between the client and the server, and the client and the server can't tell that someone's in the middle of them, then that method is susceptible to man-in-the-middle attacks. And my gut feeling is that most biometric solutions would not be able to know that a man-in-the-middle attack was occurring. So again, a man-in-the-middle attack might be like an attacker sends somebody a phishing email claiming to be from some website or service that requires biometric identity. If the victim gets tricked into clicking on the phishing email and the rogue link in the phishing email, they would end up, instead of being on the real website they thought they were going to, this man-in-the-middle rogue transparent proxy website that's in the middle, that then connects them to the victim's intended website or service. And when the victim submits their fingerprint or the retina scan or the facial scan, if it's actually transmitted all the way to the website, that man-in-the-middle website could capture that and steal that, and then reuse it later on, right? If it captures the victim's real fingerprint or facial scan or whatever it might be, then it can be replayed and reused. Or if they steal it out of the authentication database, it can be still stolen and used. I think most biometric solutions, if they actually transmitted the biometric identifier attribute remotely across the network, I think there would be some chances of this man-in-the-middle attack. I don't think any biometric solution is inherently resistant against man-in-the-middle attacks. And if they transmit the real biometric attribute across the network, that it could possibly be stolen and then reused by hackers. If you want to see a really good demo of this, it isn't with biometric solution. It's Kevin Mitnick, our chief hacking officer, does a demo with an MFA solution, but the concept is exactly the same. The only difference would be you'd have to pretend that somebody was using their fingerprint or face to authenticate instead of just typing in an MFA code or something like that. But what saves most biometric authentication solutions from being man in the middle is most of them are just logging on to a local device. Most of them are not application logons. So they're only being used to log on to the cell phone or the laptop or the iPad, and then they're using some other authentication to authenticate to their apps. Because of that, because most biometrics are device logins, I think they're far less likely to be man-in-the-middle attacked. But we are seeing increased use and chance of biometrics to be used across networks and not just doing local device logins. So just keep in mind that biometric solutions are not inherently more secure against man-in-the-middle attacks based upon how they're built. It's just that they're not used in such a way that it's easy for a remote attacker to man-in-the-middle of them. Although they can steal your biometric attributes off the local device and then use them to log into a device or a network or something like that. And we are seeing that these remote logins are growing, especially since COVID and work from home. And that, I think, makes an increasing chance that if someone's remotely authenticating, not to the device, but across the network, that it could be subject to a man-in-the-middle attack. So, watch out. But I think in general, if you're, the problem with biometric identities, one of the biggest problems is if it's stolen. Like I, along with 5.6 million other people in June 2015, had all my fingerprints stolen. Everybody that had ever applied for U.S. government security clearance, for decades, had their fingerprints stolen by Chinese advanced persistent threat attackers. Well, my fingerprints are out there. How can any system, especially any remote system that thinks it's me logging in remotely, know that it really is me? I mean, if someone steals your fingerprints or your retina scan or your face or whatever, they're not secrets, right? Someone can get your fingerprints off a Coke can. Somebody can take a picture of you or get it off the internet or whatever. They're not secrets. And once they're taken, once your biometric attributes are stolen or taken, how can you ever claim that it really is you? And again, these types of breaches happen all the time. Here's another breach. It was back in August 2019, where over 1 million fingerprints were stolen. And the actual fingerprints, not the data, but the actual fingerprints. So, once those fingerprints are stolen, they're kind of gone forever. So what I want you to do is be able to pick and use safer biometrics if you have the opportunity. I want you to choose an accurate solution. I want you to choose a secure solution. I want you to choose a solution that protects the storage of your biometric attributes so they can't be stolen. I want you to choose a solution that has liveness detection that tries to stop presentation attacks. I want you to choose a solution that stops man-in-the-middle attacks. I want you to choose a solution that doesn't have that much bias in it. So make sure the system is accurate. Not all biometric systems are equally accurate, and you need to do your research. When you talk to a vendor, ask them what algorithm they use, and then go to the NIST site if it's a facial recognition or a fingerprint recognition, or you can look at the context if it's a voice recognition, and go see which algorithm that solution is using. Don't just rely upon the vendor to tell you how accurate their solution is. Go look it up for sure. Also, sometimes you can just slightly update your system and get a better solution, like that company that had a bunch of people, when they had 435 employees and multiple employees were matching the same fingerprint, they moved from a fingerprint scanner to a fingerprint finger vein geometry reader where, read more of the finger, and that got rid of all the matches. I don't know, what the increase in accuracy was, but that was a good thing that everybody should try. Also keep in mind, sometimes even slightly inaccurate systems are okay. Like for my cell phone, I know that the fingerprint scanner reader on my cell phone is not that great, but nothing's on my cell phone that, it's not nuclear secrets or something. So, I can accept that my cell phone scanner is detuned, a cell phone fingerprint reader is detuned, and, there might be some people that could log in as me, but, the average criminal picking up my cell phone is probably not going to match it, and they're probably not going to go through some deep fake to try to match my fingerprint or whatever. And if they are, boy, they got capability. They can just rob you or something and tell you to log on in. So sometimes okay is good enough. You don't have to have perfect accuracy. Although I am a big fan of multi-factor authentication. So when I see single-factor biometrics, like just a finger swipe or a facial read, I wish it was accompanied by a PIN or a password or something like that. So that way, if someone steals your biometric attribute, it's not enough for the remote login. Make sure the solutions are, securely designed by default. It would be great if you could go up to the developer of the solution and go, hey, are your developers trained in secure development lifecycle techniques? And let me say, most developers aren't. I don't know why, but boy, I would have a lot more confidence if they were trained in how to write secure code, and if they did internal and external code reviews and penetration testing and bug bounties. I would have more faith in a biometric solution vendor that did all of these things versus a vendor that didn't. Do they have secure storage of your biometric attributes? Or if I break into the system, can I just steal your fingerprints, your face scan? It'd be nice if it was protected by, the best protection would be this hardware protection, like a trusted platform module chip or something like that, where it's really difficult for an attacker to steal it. But the attributes should at least be encrypted or hashed or what's called tokenism. And let me show you an example. Some fingerprint systems literally store your fingerprint. Even if they don't use your fingerprint and they use the points, they still store your fingerprint. That's dangerous if somebody steals it, right? What I would rather that they do is that they then make the points of your fingerprint, and maybe they plot those points to create these coordinates and then hash those coordinates. Any fingerprint, and let me say like the Apple iTouch does something like this. Many of the systems do. And that they're not storing your raw fingerprints or even the raw points. They're actually storing hash coordinates of those points. They can still be used to verify your finger, but isn't your finger. And if you can pick it, if I see a solution that's storing my fingerprints, I'm not choosing it, because if it gets stolen, then the world can have my fingerprints. Look for solutions that don't store the actual biometric attribute, but instead store a hashed version of your biometric attributes. I do look for solutions that prevent man-in-the-middle attacks. And let me say, I'm a big fan of FIDO, the Fast Identity Online solutions. If you have any biometric solution that's enabled FIDO, it's resistant to man-in-the-middle attacks. But lots of other biometric solutions may or may not be susceptible to man-in-the-middle attacks, but I'm always going to make sure that any biometric solution I have is not susceptible to man-in-the-middle attacks. And what's that mean? That if a man-in-the-middle service gets in between the client and the server, that one of them will fail to work. FIDO, anything FIDO enabled already does that, but even if it's not FIDO enabled, if the client and the server would not recognize each other if there's something in the middle of it, that's a good thing. Also look for solutions that have what's called rate limiting. Like on my cell phone, when I go to put my fingerprint to open my cell phone, it only lets me try a couple of times before all of a sudden it tells me I have to use my PIN. That's a good thing. We have rate limiting on and account lockouts on passwords. We should do the same thing for our biometric attributes, so people can't just sit there and guess in perpetuity. Certainly just be aware that some designs and implementations may have biases, right? Like facial recognition tends to have a bias against darker skinned populations, and cell phone solution to maybe people that don't have cell phones and that sort of stuff. So just keep in mind that every solution is right for every population. And really, no matter what solution you buy, you should make sure to educate yourself and other people around it about what are the strengths and weaknesses of that particular solution, what it does, how it works, what types of common attacks might be used against it, how a user would detect a common type of solution, like a man-in-the-middle attack or something like that. You really want to, before you choose any biometric solution, you want to educate yourself and other buyers and evaluators and users about what are the benefits of this particular biometric solution, what are the weaknesses of it, what are the concerns, what are the biases, what are the accuracies, and then choose your solution. That's really what I wish everybody would do. And try to pick a more secure, more accurate solution if you can. If you want more reading, there's lots of good more reading. The Biometrics Institute, FIDO has a really good, cool biometric component certification program. And then CIDR at Clarkson University is on one of the top research organizations on biometrics. I recommend all three of those sites. They're really, really good. At KnowBe4, we're very big believers in training and simulated phishing. We think everybody should be trained. We think when you get hired, you should have 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour of training, cybersecurity training when you get hired. And then every year thereafter, you have a long, 30, 45-minute program. And then every month, you get some smaller amount of training, 1, 2, 3 minutes, along with monthly simulated phishing to back up and see how well you took that training. We do know that our customers that do just what I said, which is monthly training and monthly simulated phishing, the average company comes to us that will have somewhere around a third of their employees that will be easily phished after they get KnowBe4 security awareness training monthly, that they decrease around 5%, many times lower. that's what you want to look to do. Remember, social engineering is involved in the vast majority of hacking and malware, and if you can make your employees less phishable, the better you're going to protect them and prevent biometric hacking as well. We've run out of time. I've had my hour. Thanks for putting up with me. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at rogerg@noble4.com. Again, that's rogerg@noble4.com. I'll respond to you as quickly as I can. You can also follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. With that, thanks everyone for putting up with me for the last hour, and continue to fight the good fight.